So, today we'll cover something called proprioception and kinesthesia. So, both these things are very important for your body movements. You can imagine if you're going to touch your nose, you want to know exactly where your fingers are, so you don't bang your nose. And if you try, you'll be surprised at how accurate you know. None of you, I bet you, if you close your nose, your eyes now, and decide to touch your nose would damage your nose. Okay? So you have to know two things. You have to know the position of your hand, but you also have to know what speed it's going in, because you want to slow down just before you hit your nose. If you're going fast, you have to slow down earlier. So speed is important as well. So speed is the kinesthesia part of it. Proprioception is your sense of position, exactly where your limb is. And we'll see today how the brain figures these two things out. So we'll start with the receptors. And the receptors, there's a whole bunch of them. One is joint afferents. These are located within the joints themselves. So here between the two bones, you've got afferents, and they tell you roughly where your limb is. But they're not very accurate, so they're better for telling you where the extremes of limb position is. Then you have at the end of each muscle a receptor that measures how much tension there is in the muscle, so how much force that muscle is generating. And then within the muscle itself, you have these things called spindles, and they tell you how long that spindle is, and then how long the muscle is, and that'll tell you what position the joint is at. And they also tell you how fast that muscle is being stretched, and then your sense of movement. And then finally, up here, we have tactile receptors. Remember, last week we said these are important for telling you how much stretch there is in the hand. For example, stretch on the outside of the hand and compression on the inside of the hand. That's important to tell you the position of your fingers. And finally, we have our favorite, corollary discharge. So you have this sense of effort. You command your muscle to move at with such a force, and you can predict what its position is going to be. And in fact, there's a story we'll see in a minute, about someone who lost this sense of position. Anyways, all the receptors have some sense of position, and some receptors are better than others for different situations. The brain learns to which receptor to believe. So it takes into more account the ones that are most accurate for that task. Now, spindles are very good for position and velocity. Golgi tendon organs are very good at force. And the tactile afferents are good at the hand and less important in the shoulder. Now, if you lose one receptor, then others take over. Your brain learns to say, okay, I'm not getting information from this guy, but maybe some other receptors are telling me what the position is. So if I were to get an artificial hip, and a lot of people my age start getting artificial hips, you lose those afferents in the joints, but you're still able to get your sense of position is almost as good as before. If I were to put a cuff over your wrist here. I would block the blood from getting to your hand. And then your hand would go numb. Okay, so you'd have no feeling from the skin receptors in your hand. But you'd still, the muscles, all the muscles that move your hand, if you put your other hand over your wrist, you'll notice that you'll feel them move. The muscles are located here in the upper arm. Okay? And it's just the tendons that pull on each of your fingers. Okay? So the spindles in your muscles will still be quite accurate. And you'll still be able to tell exactly where your fingers are. And finally, there's a great article about a guy who lost all sensation due to some disease. And he could still drive his manual car, so he could still change gears because he knew exactly how much force to push it in what direction. And he from his colic discharge, he had a sense that he pushed in the right direction and his hand would be in the correct position. However, he bought himself a new car, and of course the gears are very different in new cars. They're not as stiff, or some gears are even stiffer, and so he couldn't found after a few weeks that this was hopeless. So he sold his new car, bought his old car back again, and fixed it up and lived with that for many more years. Okay, let's take a look at a few of these receptors. And the first one you can see here is spindles. You can see this. The spindles are in these yellow parts. Okay, and you can see that they're located in parallel to other muscle fibers. Okay. And so whatever length the muscle fibers are pulled to, that's the same length as the spindles are pulled to, because they're in parallel. And being in parallel gives you an ideal sense of what the muscle length is. Now, in contrast, the Golgi tendon organs are in series. Okay, you have the muscle, it pulls on the tendon in turn pulls on the bone. Okay, so one is followed by the other. So it's called in series for that reason. And that's ideal because it gives you a great measure of how much force that muscle is producing, because that amount, whatever force the muscle produces, will induce that amount of stretch on this tendon. Now, within the spindles, you've got fibers, and they're much like your muscle fibers, all the other fibers in your muscle. They're different for two reasons. One is that they have these afferents wound around them that then go to your spinal cord. And the other is that one of them here is wide here in the middle, and for that reason it's called the bag fiber. The other one is more like your regular muscle fiber, and it's called a chain fiber. Now, off the bag fiber, there's a very thick fiber coming off, okay? And that's called the 1A. Off the chain fiber, there's both a thick one and a thin one coming off. The thick one, again, joins with the 1A. The thin one is called 2 or secondary. And these numbers, we'll see some more numbers, but they correspond to how big the fiber is. 1 is the biggest and 2 is the smaller. And that in turn determines how fast that fiber conducts information to the spinal cord. So remember, the bigger the fiber is, the faster it conducts. Now, this bag is a little bit like your Pisidian corpuscle from your touch system. It adapts quickly. And so it just produces action potentials while it's being stretched. When it stops being stretched, that is, the position stops changing, it becomes silent again, so as it adapts. So it just indicates how fast this muscle is being stretched. Okay? So think of it as a velocity recorder, something that tells you what speed you're going at. Now the fibers around the afferents around the chain fiber act differently because they don't have this bulge there. They just give you a tonic idea of what length this is. So the longer this is, the more these afferents will fire. Okay. Short, little, few action potentials. Long, lots of action potentials. So the important thing to remember, 1A, the fiber that comes off of that signals velocity. Chain, on the other hand, signals position. So, now you can see here your muscle is being stretched. And we'll call it a passive stretch because I just passively stretch my muscle, my bicep here, without contraction. Okay? I just increase the length of my muscle. And when that happens, during the stretch, I get activity coming from the bag fiber. Okay, you can see this green dot here. Now, okay, just during the stretch. On the other hand, from the chain fiber, there's these red action potentials coming, and they increase when it's longer and decrease when it's shorter, but they're always there. Okay. There are frequency changes. Yes? No, think of what whether it's coming from a bag or a chain. Okay, because you notice these two come together, and it becomes a 1A. So the 1A itself contains two components. One that is constantly there, giving you position, and on top of that, the green action potentials, the one that just come in during the stretch. Okay. Yes?
We talked about how one of these tied together when it's phasic.
Yes.
At the same time, because if someone uses all their action, they can still have proprioception to correlate with discharge. Is correlated discharge, is it phasic or is it tonic? If someone keeps their hand like this, do they still have proprioception after using action?
We'll cover that at the very end of this lecture. Okay. We'll go over collar discharge then. Okay. The other thing that 1As are very sensitive to is vibration, and we'll We pause here. We'll go to make a demo, try to do a demonstration towards the end of this lecture. I'll have to take something from my bag here. That. Well, you can do it now, or you might be looking for a vibrator. Okay. It's in one of those small pockets. Now, the other thing to notice is that during this passive stretch, there's not much force being exerted on my muscle, and the tendons aren't doing much. Okay, all the changes are coming from the spindles. Now, let's suppose instead I did what's called an active contraction. So, if I just pushed against my some force, okay, or some resistance, my other hand, then my hand position, the angle doesn't change at all, right? Same angle position. I just contract, and when I contract, the two end points stay the same distance apart, but this gets stretched. Okay. The inside here gets shortened, okay, rather than lengthened, and so it becomes more silent. But this becomes very active. Okay. So this tells you that Golgi tendon organs are very sensitive to the active contraction of your muscles. Now, we've got some more complications. Not only have we got afferents coming from here, but we've got signals from the brain called gamma activity, changing the sensitivity of these spindles. Now, you can see here, this is like a regular muscle, the ends of the spindles. And when activity comes down, it contracts these ends. And when these ends get contracted, this part, the middle part, becomes more sensitive to whatever it's sensitive to. Now, you've got gamma static that goes through the chain, and it makes these fibers more sensitive. These fibers are the ones that were sensitive to position. So you become more sensitive to position when you increase the gamma static. Not complicated. If you just think of this fiber going to the chain is sensitive to position, to make position more sensitive. This fiber goes to the bag is velocity sensitive, so when these things contract, your velocity becomes more sensitive. It becomes more sensitive to small changes in velocity. Okay. So these are like your volume controls, and they can adjust the volume control for the velocity or for position. Now let's look at this and just make sure we understand it. Here we have no gamma, okay? So you can just watch these things being active. Here we got the green ones happening just during the stretch, and here we got these active potentials happening all the time, but becoming more often when the muscle is longer. Okay. Now we just change the gamma static drive. Compare this one we saw here to this new one here. Gamma static, as I mentioned in the previous slide, makes this fiber more sensitive. This is the one sensitive position, so we increase the action potentials coming from those tonic action. The tonic activity comes from these fibers. Okay? You notice, you compare this to this, both are tonically active, but this is more sensitive. So it has a larger sensitivity to whatever positions you're at. In contrast, when this thing becomes active, okay, you can compare this to this, and you see there's more green action potentials coming because of this gamma. Has become more sensitive to velocity. That's what bags are sensitive to. And more green action potentials come down, and you signal a greater sensitivity to velocity. Now, why do you have this gamma? Well, when your muscle gets contracted, it gets contracted through alpha motor neurons. So these are the motor neurons that contract your muscle itself. And when you do that, when you contract the muscle itself, you can see that when it shortens, it becomes less sensitive. Okay, that shortened it, so it's not as sensitive to whatever is happening during that time. Now, if you contract and you've got alpha and gamma, even though it shortens, you maintain your sensitivity. So that means if you were to bump into something, your muscle spindle would still be able to signal that disruption of your movement and tell you, okay, you've got to correct that, and all your reflexes would kick in and make that movement correct, even though you had the small bump. Okay. So we have these afferents. What do they do? We'll look at some of the spinal circuitry that they work on. The first one we'll look at is called the monosynaptic stretch reflex, and that involves your muscle spindle that where you get information primarily from your 1As. Okay? Now you can see during the stretch, you pull on this muscle, you get activity from this muscle spindle, that goes to this motor neuron, that then contracts this muscle, that contraction shortens the muscle. So a longer muscle becomes a shorter muscle. So this is controlling the muscle length. It's a reflex that's regulating the length of the muscle. It tries to maintain this length constant. And because you just see one synapse here, and because this is using the 1A afferent, okay, it's the fastest of all the spinal reflexes that we'll talk about today. It has the shortest latency. Now let's suppose there's too much activity coming from this motor neuron. As a consequence, we've got too much contraction. That spindle, that the Golgi tendon organ will sense that, and it will activate this neuron here. Now this neuron here is an inhibitory neuron to the motor neuron. So then it decreases this motor neuron's activity. That then relaxes the muscle, reducing its force. So let's replay that again. There's too much force being generated on the muscle. Golgi tendon organ gets activated. It hits that inhibitory neuron. That decreases the activity of the motor neuron. That reduces the force. Okay? So this reflex and this afferent is regulating how much force your muscle is generating. It's trying to maintain a constant force. So imagine a situation. Let's say you've all got a nice hot cup of coffee from Tim Hortons, okay, and you're trying to hold that cup of coffee. Now, you can imagine that getting the force right on a hot cup of coffee is important. Okay, too little force, it drops out of your hand. Too much force, you crush the cup. Okay, so imagine that situation as if it's a situation that this reflex controls. It tries to keep your pressure constant. Now, another reflex is called reflexes that are mediated by pain and also by cutaneous receptors. And imagine that you step on a tack. Well, what's your response? The response is get this leg away from the tag, but also the best thing is to put your weight on the opposite leg. Okay? This is your leg on one side of your body, let's say to the right, and this is the leg on the other side of your body, left. Okay? So to get the tack, this foot away from the tack, you want to contract the flexor muscle, hold your foot off the tack. To put your weight on this leg, you want to activate the extensors. So to do that, these afferents here that come from this reflex, the pain and cutaneous, they follow a very complicated circuit. Many synapses, and these synapses activate on this side, activate the flexors. Also at the same time, they cross over to the other side. Again, many synapses, and they activate the extensors. Okay. You might say, okay, why not, you got these muscle spindles, why do you have the sensitivity go up and down? Why not just keep it constant at a good sensitivity? Well, all of your actions require a different sensitivity. So, for example, if you're trying to thread a needle, okay, to thread a needle, you want very precise control of your position. And you might sometimes notice that when you're threading a needle, your hand does tend to shake because you've increased the sensitivity too much. If you guys get into medicine and start doing some surgery, and you're doing some fine surgery with your scissors, you might notice that your hand sometimes shakes when you're in a sensitive situation and you're trying to control your position with precision. So you up the reflex too much. Let's see what happens, why that happens. So this is the normal reflex. You notice, okay, you pull, that activates contraction, but then you got to stop it. Okay, let's watch it being stopped. Okay, you got this reflex coming from the other side. Okay, this reflex now starts pulling on this muscle. That pull on this muscle activates the spindle on this muscle. That then contracts this muscle. And when this muscle contracts, that stops the movement. Okay? So to get this that reflex to work properly, you have to have a nice, careful adjustment of the sensitivity of both these reflexes, and they'll stop the movement exactly where it should be. I think I've said exactly. Okay, in this case, we have the sensitivity set too high. And you notice what's happening here is that at this point here, you're stretching this. That produces a big activity in the antagonist. That then produces a real extension of your hand. And that then stretches, of course, this muscle, and they keep stretching each other ad infinitum. Okay? And you get tremor. Now, we talked about this reflex, but there's another reflex that involves the cortex. Okay? So you can see here that whenever this spindle becomes active, activity comes around the spinal cord. But you can also see an action potential heading up through the dorsal column, through the thalamus, And instead of 3B, which we looked at last week, this is now 3A because it's proprioception. And then to the motor cortex and back down again, contracting the muscle. Okay? So you will see, if you measure the activity in the muscle, called the electromyographic response, EMG, it's easier to say, you would see an early response, which is the one coming round the spinal cord, and then a later response, and that's a long loop response that travels down through the cortex, through 3A and motor cortex. Now this one is under voluntary control. Okay, so there's a lot of adjustments that can happen on this reflex based on all kinds of learning. The cerebellum has a big influence on this reflex. And so when you do skilled sports like catching a ball, hardball, or a softball, or you can set this reflex for the expected weight of the ball that's being thrown at you, and have just the right amount of springiness to your reflex to catch it properly. Okay, vibrator time. I need a volunteer. Both elbows on this table.
Like that?
Like that. Okay. And I'm going to vibrate right here. Okay.
Okay.
And what you have to do first is just to show me that everything works. So put both elbows there. Okay. And close your eyes. And the idea is you match whatever I put this hand to with the other hand. Okay. So let's see you match it. Okay. I don't know if you guys can see from that side of the room, but she is pretty accurate. So there's nothing wrong with her spindle sensitivity. Okay. So now keep your eyes closed, and I'm going to vibrate this tendon here, and we'll see what happens. Now, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, keep following. Follow, try to match the two hands. Now, okay, look, see where it is?
Okay.
So, this hand was at a longer length than this hand.
Yeah.
Okay, good, we're done.
Okay.
So, this is the picture that our subject displayed. I was vibrating this tendon, and this tendon is, rather than vibrating this tendon, surprisingly does nothing or very little to the Golgi tendon organ, but produces a lot of activity in your 1A. So imagine that there's activity coming from this 1A on the dark or lighter side, and this 1A here. And the brain is trying to match the two. So because there's the normal activity coming from 1A, plus the activity produced by the vibration, the brain thinks that it should move this other arm to a longer length. Okay? As a consequence, we had this error. So, normally, what the other thing that I forgot to demonstrate, was that she would be just as accurate had she contracted her muscle or left it slack. So the muscle, the hand that I pulled, if it was resisting me, actively contracting, or just slack, it would measure its position correctly. Now And in some ways, it should be a surprise to you because there's something wrong. Because when there's lots of alpha gamma activity, that means that this spindle sensitivity is raised. There should be more activity coming from this spindle than from this spindle. Okay? And you could not judge you'd think you wouldn't be able to judge the position correctly. But you can. And this is where you were asking about corollary discharge. This is where corollary discharge comes into play. Okay? So, your sense of position is not just the sense of position coming from your spindles. Okay? It's also being compared to a copy of the command that's being sent down to the muscle. So there's an alpha-gamma coactivation, and that signal gets sent to this system here, and for the time being we'll ignore where this is, and to the muscle and the spindle together. Yes? Okay, no. Feel free to stretch. Yeah, so let's compare what happens here. Here's a situation where there's low alpha gamma coactivation, and here's a situation where there's high alpha gamma coactivation. The limb position is the same in both cases, and when you try this yourself, if you go home and have someone pull on your limb, you'll be able to sense this position just as well as when they're not pulling on your limb. So whether or not you have alpha gamma coactivation or not, you'll still be able to sense the position correctly. How do we do that? Well, when the alpha gamma coactivation is low, a low signal gets sent to this comparator. At the same time, a low spindle activity is being produced. The two cancel each other out, and you sense a certain position. When there's high alpha gamma coactivation, there's a high spindle activity because you get good sensitivity. But at the same time, this corollary discharge tells you you should expect high gamma coactivation or high spindle activity. And as a consequence, you still sense the correct position. Okay, so that's the other thing is that if you close your eyes and move your two fingers together, you will find that you're remarkably accurate. So you really know where your position is of your finger in space relative to you. You know this finger's egocentric position. Now, this isn't as simple a problem as you might think at first. Okay? So that information is coming up here to 3A. This is the 3B that we talked about last week. And this gives you a signal the signal it tells you is of the muscle length. And from that you can tell what the joint angle is. For example, if this was coming from the elbow joint, you can tell the elbow joint angle. But, let's say to tell the position of your finger, you got to know not just the elbow angle, you got to know the hand angle, the finger angle, the shoulder angle. Okay? So, you've got these signals that are plus. You have to know the lengths of all these limbs. Okay? So there's a lot of learning to be done. So where the finger is relative to your body is computed, we think it's computed as follows. You come in at area 3A, This is where all the proprioceptive signal comes into. And this signal heads back into the parietal cortex, along this interparietal sulcus that is part of this wear stream that we talked about early in the lectures. And these individual angles, so the shoulder angle, the elbow angle, the hand angle, all get combined, and you get a sense of where your position is relative to you in this area. Now, the other thing is that this is like one of these frame of reference things where we had an apple sitting on the table, and we can move the table, and as a consequence, we change the position of the apple. Well, the same thing here. If I just change the shoulder angle, I change the position of my finger, because all these other angles will be, the position of all these things will be shifted as well. If I change just the hand angle, this won't change at all. So you have these nested frames of reference here. You can think of the fingers sitting on the elbow sitting on the shoulder sitting on the body. It's like the apple sitting on a table, the table sitting in a room, a nested frame of reference. Okay, so that was the wear stream. It headed back into the interparietal sulcus. The other thing is a what stream. The what stream comes primarily from all the afferents we talked about in the previous lecture. The information that comes from your sense of touch. Okay? And from that you can tell, let's say, that you're holding a cube or holding a shell or any object. So that information from your touch system goes back and goes to the area called S2, called a secondary somatosensory system. And that then goes to over here in this part here is mostly in this big fissure under here. There's a big area in there, and that in turn goes to the insular cortex and the inferior temporal lobe. So if you don't have that, you won't have something called sterignosis, which is when you were to grab objects from a bag that you couldn't see, you couldn't tell what all those objects were. It's like having a lesion of your LOC. You can't visually tell what an object is. There's a lesion here. You can't tell what an object is from tactile information. Okay, that's it.